morning. I feel like I should warn you up front, I'm going to be talking about United Methodist stuff again, so if you've had your fill of that already the last couple of weeks, you'll have a little room for a nap coming up. But I do hope you'll hear the readings that we've got this morning. The first is a poem by Dorian Lux called Life on Earth. I keep wanting to call it Life is a Miracle because that's really what she's saying in this, but Life on Earth. The odds are we should never have been born. Not one of us. Not one in 400 trillion, to be exact. Only one among the 250 million released in a flood of semen that glides like a glassine limousine filled with tadpoles of possible people, one of whom may or may not be you. A being made of water and blood, a creature with eyeballs and limbs that end in fists, a you with all your particular perfumes, the chords of your sinewy legs singing as they form, your organs humming and buzzing with new life, moonbeams lighting up your brain's gray coils, the exquisite hills of your face, the human toy your mother longs for, your father yearns to hold, the unmistakable you who will take your first breath, your first step, bang a copper pot with a wooden spoon, trace the lichen growing on a boulder you climb to see the wild expanse of a field, the one whose heart will yield to the yellow forsythia, named after William Forsythe, not the American actor with piercing blue eyes, but the Scottish botanist who discovered the buttery bells on a highland hillside blooming to beat the band, zigzagging down an unknown Scottish slope. And those are only a few of the things you will one day know, slowly chipping away at your ignorance and doubt, you who were born from ashes and will return to ash. When you think you might be through with this body and soul, look down at an anthill or up at the stars. Remember your gambler chances, the bounty of good luck you were born for. Our Bible reading for this morning is the assigned reading from the Gospel of John, John 15. And this is Jesus gathered with his friends, and this is what he says to them. As my Abba has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love, and you will abide in my love if you keep my commandments, just as I abide in Abba God's love and have kept God's commandments. I tell you all this that my joy may be yours, and your joy may be complete. This is my commandment. Love one another as I've loved you. There's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. And you are my friends if you do what I command you. I no longer speak of you as subordinates, because a subordinate doesn't know a superior's business. Instead, I call you friends because I have made known to you everything I have learned from Abba God. It was not you who chose me. It was I who chose you to go forth and bear fruit. Your fruit must endure, so that whatever you ask of Abba God in my name, God will give you. This command I give you, that you love one another. It's love all the way down. That's what I hear in this. Love that is the ground of our being, love that is the fabric of our existence, love that is the wellspring of our lives, which isn't always easy to remember, especially when our lived experience seems to suggest otherwise. But here it is. Your name is beloved. Live in love. If you sit down and read through the Gospel of John, it can be easy to lose track of what's going on in a particular scene. That's especially true of the reading that we got today, the part that this reading comes from. John's Gospel devotes several entire chapters to Jesus saying goodbye to his friend, his farewell speech, several chapters long. This reading is from those chapters. There's a tradition, a practice in contemporary Judaism that is called the ethical will. I don't know actually when it formed, but it is often an actual written document that a person might create at the end of their life, once they realize that they are dying. They look over the course of their life and try to capture the legacy, offer their hopes and their dreams for their families, the values that they want to pass on, the things that are important to them, the things they want their children and loved ones to remember about them and keep moving forward in this world to carry with them. This long section of John reminds me of that contemporary practice of creating the ethical will. It's Jesus, keenly aware that his death is approaching. He's talking with his beloveds about his own legacy, his deepest hopes for them. And the most important bullet point in his presentation is this: love one another. Take care of each other as best as you're able. Hold on to each other. Which might seem basic, maybe even a little trite, until we remember whom he was talking to. They were the people who were closest to him, yes, but that also meant that they were the people who let him down the most often, who were constantly getting him wrong, the people who would run off in fear and abandon him when the authorities arrived, the person he predicted would deny even knowing him if he thought that would save his skin. It's even deeper than that, though. Judas wasn't still here in the room at the time when Jesus said this part because he was out setting the wheels in motion on the gears that were going to end Jesus' life. But before he left, before Judas left, Jesus washed everyone's feet as an act of humility, as an act of love, as a model for relationship, including Judas. Love one another. Take care of each other. As best as you're able, hold on to each other. Love is the precondition of our existence. Health insurance might not cover it, I guess, but belovedness is our pre-existing condition. Sometimes we even figure out how to make that work in practice, like the United Methodist Church has been doing the past couple of weeks. We undid the prohibition on ordaining LGBTQ+ people. We lifted a ban on allowing denominational funds going to groups that advocate for full inclusion and equality. We lifted a ban on celebrating same-sex weddings. There's a lot to grieve from the past century, a lot that will be grieved. The people who didn't stay alive long enough to see this change. But there's also a lot to celebrate right now. You've been many of you, getting my email updates, and I preached about this last week, so I'm not going to try to rehash everything. But I want to share one story that I found remarkable and that felt like a connection to this gospel reading. One of the big tasks of the General Conference was to revise, this is boring church stuff, I know, but also it's real stuff. And the big task was to revise the denomination's statement of social principles. The social principles are kind of like a denomination-wide vision of ethics. I don't want to overstate that because there are lots of people who've been lifelong churchgoers who have no idea that these even exist, let alone knowing what they say. But they do, as best as they can, provide a comprehensive vision of what the flourishing life might look like at the individual, the family, the communal, the social level. While one of the most important tasks at General Conference was to strip out the explicitly homophobic language from those principles, they ran into a blockage on a point about marriage and family. In addition to taking out the harmful language, the proposed revisions would have taken out the language that said marriage is between one man and one woman, limiting it to heterosexual marriage. Some African delegates who'd been part of the coalition to make these big changes made clear as far back as January that this was a step too far for them. Nobody quite knew what was going to happen when it came up for voting this time. Last week, I shared the welcoming statement from a reconciling church in Kenya, one of two, which are congregations that welcome and include people of every sexual and gender identity. It was a deeply inspiring statement. And the mere existence of two reconciling congregations in Kenya is definitely a cause for hope. But the broader situation in Africa is a lot more complicated than that. And the reporting from this week makes clear why the statement on marriage generated such deep reaction. As one news article put it this way, homosexuality is illegal, indeed a crime, in more than 24 African countries. I'll add that actually in some of those countries there are at least proposals to make it a capital punishment. Many African United Methodists wanted a definition of marriage that does not put them in the crosshairs of national laws. They're also trying to fight the plague of child marriage. This is where things got really interesting. The coalition of moderates and progressives from the US and some from Europe, they knew that they had the votes to push forward the new statement that says a marriage simply is between two people. They also knew that would feel like a deep betrayal to the African delegates who'd been working with them on these other changes. But they weren't going to strip out the harmful language only to add back in something else that was additionally harmful. So what they were prepared to do was delete the whole section and not let it say anything about marriage at all, on the principle that it's better to not say anything at all than to, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all, right? The thing we all learned from our parents. And then this happened. A delegate from Zimbabwe, one of the repressive nations, got up to the microphone to speak. What she offered was an amendment that would make the statement say this: its original intent, with a parenthetical comment. Within the church, we affirm marriage as a sacred lifelong covenant that brings two people of faith, and here's the parentheses, adult man and woman of consenting age, or two adult persons of consenting age, then the rest of it, into union with one another. It's clunky. It's imperfect. It's messy. It names two very different conceptions of the same thing within the same sentence now. But it was an attempt at compromise. The delegate who brought it said that she wanted to honor regional differences in the church, which is exactly what the first week's votes were all about, moving the denomination past its crippling impasses to free up resources for actual ministry that makes people's lives better, allowing for attention to local context. The amended statement passed by a margin of 3-1, which is not to say that it's a perfect statement. Clearly, it is not. Ultimately, I hope that all churches in all regions will become reconciling congregations that fully include folks of every sexual and gender identity at all levels of congregational life. I hope that United Methodists in church or in countries where homosexuality is illegal will find ways to challenge those laws and harbor people in the meantime. But I also acknowledge that I don't live under the same set of risks that they do. So I will hope my hopes. I will keep supporting the work of the Reconciling Ministries Network, and I will say that in the messiness of a global denomination. What happened this week at General Conference looks an awful lot like abiding in the love of Jesus and loving one another as Jesus loves, even when it's messy. Love one another, take care of each other, as best as you're able, hold on to each other. It feels sometimes overwhelming. I mean, when we're paying attention to the difficulties and complexities of our own lives, not to mention paying attention to the world around us. Gaza, Ukraine, Haiti, the circus at home, the active embracers of authoritarianism, the politics of pain. Love one another as I have loved you, which means you are loved. You who, as Dorian Lux reminds us, arrived here against all the odds. You, the cells that connected and divided and grew until they fleshed out into the one you out of the infinite possibilities. You are a miracle whose name is beloved. Maybe that's the best place to start. We're all miracles. We're all beloved. Even when things get messy, we can hold on to that. And sometimes, with grace and ingenuity, with grief and lament, and the courage to hope, with the conviction of our belovedness and the belief in the belovedness of others, sometimes it's enough to move us a little closer to where God called us in the first place. And that is God's good news. Amen.